Here's a special important message.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 18 of We Are the Road Crew. It is the final episode of the podcast for this season. My name's Stephen Hill. I am your host. This podcast is a podcast where we take you behind the scenes in the world of music, speak to some of the people who are responsible for oiling the gears and manoeuvring the mechanics in the world of live music. If you are a fan of heavy metal, this should be a very, very special podcast. My name is Stephen Hill. I'm your host, and we are going out big. Our guest this week is Chad Zaemisch, who is James Hetfield's guitar tech. James Hetfield from Metallica. I'll talk more about Chad in a second. Before I get into that, I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our friends at Signature Brew. Signaturebrew.co.uk is the place if you want to go and pick yourself up some very fine beverages. They have been brewing music-inspired beers, supporting live music since 2011. They've done collaborative drinks with the likes of Mastodon, Jamie Lenman, Idols, Slaves, Mogwai, Enter Shikari, many more. I have to say again, as I mentioned last week, very refreshing Jamie Lenman aid that they do for the designated driver. Check that out. It's very, very good. Thank you so much for your support throughout the season, guys. Very, very much appreciated. 10% off all of their beverages at signaturebrew.co.uk when you use the code ROADCREW in the checkout. We can sort that out for you, no doubt about it at all. Want to say a big thank you to the guys at Factory Studio. As I mentioned a few times, we've not been able to use Factory Studio in the heart of central London, which is where we usually would record the podcast this season due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a bit of a bummer, but I'm sure we're getting close to be able to going back home, and maybe in the next season we'll be back with some stuff kind of face to face, because it has been weird, having to do a lot of these remotely and me sitting in my kitchen just sort of staring at the dishes. It's not very rock and roll. Wanted to say a big thank you to everybody who has appeared on the show in this season. So Stevie Firth, Rishi Louis Gowrie, John Burton, Frank Fanelli, Armando Aguirre, Tom Campbell, Michelle Peternato, Steve Lagudi. And, of course, last week we had Dan Hawcroft, who I fanboyed out a little bit over just because he was so close to Lemmy from Motorhead. And if you thought I fanboyed out a little bit last week, here we go. Chad, as I mentioned, is James Hetfield from Metallica's guitar tech. I can't think of another role in the music industry as someone who has to play a guitar that could be higher. I mean, where do you go from James Hetfield from Metallica? Absolutely unbelievable job. I have got so many questions for this gentleman that I'm just going to get straight into it. Here is me talking to Chad Zaemisch, James Hetfield's guitar tech. Here he is. All right, Chad joins us from whereabouts in the US are you, Chad? I don't actually know.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia, home of Mastodon.
Yes, indeed.
And many other great bands. How is it out there for you at the moment? What during the kind of the lockdown and COVID-19? I mean, how are you guys taking it out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting time. I guess the hard part for me right now is kind of not really knowing what to do. Like, here in my neighborhood, everything is calm and peaceful, and then a couple miles away downtown, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
There's just a lot going on, and I can't. I feel a little bit helpless. Like it's hard to watch violence, and it's hard to feel helpless, and you want to see things change. So I'm trying to get. Hoping we get past the chaos stage and into the reform stage.
It's a very, very scary time. I mean, particularly for you guys over there. My girlfriend's from South Carolina, and she doesn't know when she's going to be able to go home. She looks at the news every day, and she's very, very worried about it all. And yeah, I mean, I kind of echo your thoughts. Really, we just want to be able to go back to normal, go to gigs and live in a kind of peaceful, harmonized society. I think that's what the majority, 99.9% of people in the world, that's what we want, isn't it, essentially?
Yeah. It's the unknown is, as far as work and concerts and all that stuff goes, is the most difficult part, because in 3 weeks we could be rehearsing. I don't know. In 3 months we might be doing something. I know there's things planned, of course, but nobody's really in charge of the virus and what it's doing, and all the local governments have their own ideas on how things should be as far as large groups of people getting together. I initially kind of thought that we might sort of chase the open areas, like say, Scandinavia opens up or something.
Yeah.
Go there and start doing shows where you can, any place that you're able to do it. But I don't know. Obviously, the size of our show and everything, at least with Metallica, kind of hard to just throw something together. If there was a festival situation, it would probably be a lot easier to just show up and bang out a set, which is what we all want to do. I really want to be back out there doing stuff for people and having fun and watching people enjoy themselves. And I just don't know when that's going to happen, and it's really hard to not know that. Yeah,
amen to that. It is a difficult scenario that everybody's in. Every week I speak to someone, and it's the same thing ad infinitum. It's just we don't know. Nobody can really know. It's such an odd situation. It makes you really realize how special live music is. I think that's what everybody now realizes more than ever.
Oh, I think everyone's probably just sitting around going, man, I really took that for granted.
Absolutely. I know I did. I can't lie, I did. So while we can't plan for the future, we can kind of reminisce on the past with your story. Let's go all the way back to when you first kind of got into music, and particularly live music. Do you remember the first gig that you went to and what kind of effect that had on you?
The first gig I went to, the first real large rock concert thing I went to, I believe was the Cult opening up for Billy Idol.
Wow,
and that was
nice.
Up near where I grew up in southern Wisconsin, at the outdoor venue kind of towards Milwaukee. And yeah, it was just the sights and the sounds and the smell, it was kind of everything was like, wow, this is like the energy in here was kind of different than any sort of sporting event or anything that I had encountered at that point. So it was very curious. And I'd already been playing with my high school buddies in a band and stuff. So that was sort of this inconceivable thing. Is like, how do you get to play in front of so many people? Yeah. It must be amazing,
Yeah. That duo of, kind of both British bands as well, the Cult and Billy Idol, must have been pretty flamboyant a show to be your first show to go to and see that and go like, oh, okay, that's the kind of standard of spectacle that we can you can aim for, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we were playing all kinds of different music in the band I was in, but that was definitely approaching the hair band era, and to see Steve Stevens just, all the moves and the hair going and everything. But for the Cult, I just looked down there kind of taking all this in. I looked down and there's a guy with this huge buffalo hat on, singing his ass off. I'm going, what is going on here? It was a bit eye-opening, but it was, it was great. It was a great show.
So you were playing music yourself at that point. You were obviously a guitarist in a band. So I'm guessing, oh no, you weren't.
Drums.
Yeah. Right, okay. I've made a faux pas straight away. So what led you to the drums, and what kind of changed from drums to guitar? How did that happen?
To be clear, I'm not a student of the guitar as far as playing goes. I've always done it for fun. My mom played, she showed me a few chords, and I always enjoyed just kind of trying to figure out songs, how they're played, how they're put together. But drums was always kind of my main passion. I had just started in school and, played in the school programs and stuff up through high school, and then for a year beyond that, college. But I don't know. Guitar is just fascinating. It's kind of hard to not be intrigued by the guitar itself. I've made a few guitars from just raw blank pieces of wood, and it's very interesting process to kind of go through that and make an instrument. But yeah, I mean, everybody loves a guitar, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It is the sexiest instrument. I think it's interesting you say drums, because drums feels like the kind of the primitive, wild man instrument, whereas the guitar is more the kind of flamboyant instrument. So I was always a little bit more attracted to the drums myself as well, personally. So it's kind of interesting that you were initially attracted to the drums.
Yeah, just as an aside, we played, we learned Master of Puppets and a couple other Metallica songs way back when. And they were so rhythmic and so, like, James is a guitar player, but he sort of comes from this sort of percussive angle, and it's about the rhythm and the drive, which is what the drummer's traditionally supposed to be back there doing. So when you really meld those two together, like James did, it was like, just really motivated me. It was like, whoa, okay, I get this now.
Yeah, I mean, they're not. It's not going to be the first time I say this in this podcast, but Metallica kind of invented and then perfected that. I mean, I think so many metal bands, when you go from, I don't know, Igor and Max Cavalera and Sepultura through to the Duplantier brothers in Gojira, that kind of core of drummer and rhythm guitarist has become such a kind of an integral relationship in metal, in heavy music, I think. And like most things in metal, Metallica are kind of the first and the best to do that thing, aren't they, really?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a weakness for me, because when I pick up the guitar, I want to kind of play it like the drums, and which means any sort of solo I would attempt to be completely devoid of any sort of fluid motion. So fine. It's a little devastating for me, but it's still fun. That's why I always just sort of pictured myself the Malcolm Young rather than the Angus Young.
Yeah, nice. What kind of happened between you as a drummer playing with your buddies in high school to learning about and understanding? I mean, when was the first time you noticed that there were other people just to the side of the stage, and how did that kind of role? How did you get into that role of actually getting side stage?
Yeah, it was a bit of a roundabout way, but I had gone to typical university, also in Wisconsin, and it went for a year. It was like a jazz program, and it was nice to be surrounded by other people that were really just loved music, but it wasn't kind of blowing me away. I wasn't ready for college. I was kind of happy to be out of the house and moving. I always had this sort of dream to get away from the small town that I grew up in. Like, I wanted to get out and see things, be places. And so I kind of floundered around for a little bit, and I worked in landscaping and some construction and stuff for a year and a half. A lot of snow plowing up there, and it was, I had slowly realized that maybe bending over a shovel in the sun wasn't the greatest trajectory for me. So I actually found out about a recording school up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and that sort of intrigued me, because I had always been into the technical side of things. I'd always been a kind of kid that was taking apart the radio and other stuff that my parents would have to buy again and see how things worked. And the idea of sort of the physical act of making music was always interesting to me. So I went to this recording engineer program, and it was at the very early days of Pro Tools and the digital audio and things. And I had started to learn that a little bit, and I really liked the mystique of the studio and everything. But while I was there, I started helping out a guy that would set the PA up for the Friday afternoon concerts. So there was like a bass, guitar, drums, other vocal program at the school as well. So the students would perform on Fridays, right? So I started helping out this guy, setting up the microphones and kind of learning how to tune the PA a little bit. So I got into that end of audio. And I asked a couple people and said, well, if I wanted to do this more, how do I do that? And they directed me to the largest kind of regional sound company that was just right down the road from school. And I went down there, just kind of knocked on the door and said, I'm happy to sweep up and do whatever it takes. Start as low, wherever I can start and start learning from these people. And what I really liked was, when you take out a sound system and everything to do a show, it's like, again, the energy, it's the same thing. People are there to do this sort of communal thing, and people are there to have a good time, generally speaking. Unless you're doing corporate gigs where you're listening to insurance seminars. But it was the energy, and it was the kind of like, hey, this could be a cool job to be around this all of the time. And there's so many things to learn. That was when I really started to feel like I wanted to learn something, not that I had to learn something. And it's insane the amount of technology that has occurred between then. So this was 1991, 92 in there somewhere. But there's still so much to learn. It's insane. But so I kind of started doing that. Anyway, while I was there, I had taken out a sound system with the Breeders. And a guy that I worked with had worked with that band before, and we did this U.S. tour. That was my first time touring, and so it was kind of helping with the monitor system. And I was blown away at that point because it was like the first time I had ever been on a plane. The first time I'd been to the West Coast, seen the ocean. All of these things were like first time things, and I'm like, touring and almost every night's just kind of like great sort of party vibe thing. And so the Breeders, then the following summer, they went off to Europe, and then I went back and was working at First Avenue and kind of doing sound and stuff there and whatever gigs they had for us. And so they were going to do Lollapalooza the following summer, and it being a festival and the changeover times are super fast, so they wanted to add a backline person or a guitar tech or whatever you want to call me. Yeah. And they asked me if I wanted to go. Wow, and nice. Since I played a little guitar, I knew how to plug stuff in. Easy to get along with. Like, they liked me as a person, so they thought, well, why don't we just take this guy with us? So that's the first time I started actually doing guitars. And it sort of didn't matter to me what I was doing, because I could help with all of this stuff. And I already spoke the language of audio, so to speak, to the audio guys, so I could sort of relate to everybody. And that was the first time I did that. And I didn't really care as long as I was out moving and touring.
Speaking at this point, I would have been a very young British kid from a little village. The stories, obviously pre-internet, the stories of Lollapalooza, the mystique of this fest, which is supposed to be this incredible, first ever massive touring American festival. And you looked at the lineup every year and you saw Ministry and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Soundgarden and Nine Inch Nails and Pearl Jam. And you just go, oh my God, this looks like the greatest day of any of our lives it would be. But anyway, it was far too far away for any of us to get to. What was it like, Lollapalooza?
I had seen it, I think 1 year, or I had seen it the year Soundgarden was one of the co-headliners. That was the first real large open field kind of festival thing I had been to. And it was loud and just, open and free. There weren't, you weren't sitting in seats, so to speak. And so I had kind of already knew what the feeling was there. So then all of a sudden to be a closer part of it a year or two later was very exciting. I mean, that's why I jumped at the chance. I wasn't like, well, no, I'd rather be doing audio. I was just like, I want to go be part of the scene, whatever's going on, the music and all that. And it was very, it was a really good vibe between all of the bands, just backstage, the whole traveling circus vibe. It was pretty fun. And, everywhere you went, people were happy to see you, people, because we played some kind of more off the beaten track sort of places, and people in that town were just like, they were so happy that you were there. And they were also kind of wanted to really be part of it. And I guess all you would really see back then was blurbs on MTV and things like that. It's not like people weren't live streaming from Lollapalooza 1994, right? So
no.
you had to go there and do it and see it and be part of it. And I loved that.
Yeah. I would read the reviews in Kerrang, or I'd see the old lineup poster or whatever, and just go, I'd do anything to go to that. I'd just love to be there. It's good to hear that there was a sort of camaraderie within the bands, because that was another thing that I think, if you're talking kind of 92, 93 era, then alternative rock at this point is the biggest thing. Like grunge, it's the biggest thing in the world. I mean, did that feel like an exciting time to be around those bands at that time when so many of them were taking over the world?
Definitely. And I think, now looking back on it now, I feel like the creative level was so high at that time. You've got like L7 out there banging out sets just as good as any rock band ever, in the middle of the day. And just killing it. And then you've got I did it in 94 and 95, I think it was. So some of the bands get mixed up to me, but and then like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and the Beastie Boys, and I felt like every band was so different.
Yeah.
And everyone, I feel like the early Lollapalooza stuff was so nurturing to anybody that was different or just creative or sounded like their own thing. I think the first year, I think the second year I did it there was a Japanese band. They were a noise kind of act. They were the first act on during the day, so I'd like wake up in the bus behind the stage to this noise. I'm just like, oh my God, they're at it again already. All right, we got to start another day. And halfway through that is when Green Day really started to take off. And they came out and replaced that act in the first slot. And the kids went bananas. Like, the kids were starving for that kind of punk rock and roll sound. And I think it was the first show, maybe, they pulled up in that shitty old school bus that their dad drove. And the kids out on the lawn at the amphitheater, they basically stormed the stage, and they were picking up chairs and passing them over, and there were coming chairs everywhere up on the stage, and we were helping to like get stuff out of the way so those guys could even continue performing. So those are the energy levels that it's almost it's almost hard to replicate that whole kind of vibe.
Yeah. And for you personally, like getting into the business around that time as well, I mean, it must have made you think, well, I need to get on as many of these tours. And I mean, it must be such a kind of intoxicating and addictive feeling to be in that environment. Yeah,
I think the big takeaway for me was that I had just grown up in the Midwest, very limited radio, just, classic rock and roll as we know it today. And I didn't have a lot of exposure to all this other stuff. And because California to me was a million miles away, New York was a bazillion miles away. So being exposed to all that new stuff really just opened me up to everything beyond rock bands or hair bands and anything that was just kind of standard issue radio play at the time. I still try and carry that with me, keep an open mind. Watch a band on stage, watch the whole set before you just kind of make up your mind right away because of what they look like or how they act or something, So that was my takeaway for sure.
Yeah. So after Lollapalooza ended and the circus left town, what happened to you after that? Where did you go next?
Well, I guess that was my first sort of introduction to how things work, because people always ask, well, how did you get on this tour? How did you get on that tour? The management company that managed the Breeders also managed Hole, and Courtney has just kind of releasing Live Through This, and as my thing was winding down with the Breeders. So one of their managers kind of came to me and said, hey, I got another tour for you if you want. it's kind of a, low pay, low sleep, high stress kind of a thing. And I'm like, yeah, why not? I want to keep going. Like, I don't want to go back to Minneapolis and get snowed on all winter. So I basically went to work for Courtney almost right away.
Right.
And that involved, at that time, Kurt had already passed, and it was a really tumultuous time for her, for the band, I think for music as well. But I was forced to learn a lot more about guitars and how they worked and how to keep things from being unplugged.
Yeah.
Because it was a pretty wild stage show, depending on Courtney's mood that night. So I had to learn how to fix guitars because they were often getting broken. And I had to learn how to, okay, I have to make sure I have enough spares, which is a big roadie thing. If one thing breaks, I've got 3 more to replace it, right? Never leave yourself open to, what am I going to do? Or, telling the artist they can't have their favorite distortion pedal because I don't have another one. That stuff wasn't going to fly. Yeah. And so I had to sort of elevate what I was doing, especially if I wanted to keep doing it, because I felt at the time, even though I still loved audio, that this seems to be working out for me right now, so why don't I just ride it for a while? Mm-hmm. And we ended up getting in another guitar tech at some point to help Eric Erlinson out, and Billy Bush, who's continues to be part of my story. And he was very good guitar tech and taught me a lot of stuff. And from there, not only do you end up kind of working for one management company's sort of stable of bands, like they might take you from this tour to another tour. There, an act starts up in the fall, or hang on till spring and you come do this band with us. And the other way is to meet other technicians that are also jumping from band to band to band, or go off to work for the regular band and their guy gets sick or fired or something, and there's an opening, and that person kind of goes through the quick mental Rolodex of who do I like, who would be a good fit for this, who do I want to work with. So that's kind of the person that you want to be as a technician on the road. You want to be easy to get along with.
Yeah.
You hope that you can kind of do your job well, or well enough for now until you learn more. Don't be a pain in the ass. Just be available. Be there to help. And you'll kind of go places just sort of automatically.
So you were there, to go back to kind of Hole, you were there with, like you say, a very tumultuous time for Courtney. I'm quite interested to know what Courtney's like to work for, because I think she gets a really bad rap from the industry. If someone like Axl Rose behaves in a certain way, we go, "Oh, great, what a rock star!" But I feel like because Courtney is a woman, it's like, oh well, look at her. And she had a very, very. I think she's been incredibly unfairly maligned over the years. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of personal feelings. She always treated me with great respect. Had she not, I wouldn't have stuck around.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things that were just like stage antics and things like that were, some were kind of fun, some were stressful. She loved the attention like anybody, there's a certain ego level you have to stand up in front of these people and entertain them. There was a lot of people that went to her shows looking for chaos.
Yeah.
Just we don't know what's going to happen. She comes out on stage. It could be 3 songs. It could be, we did some really long shows and only played like 4 songs because it turned into what I would call the Donahue sessions, where she would end up sitting on the edge of the stage with a microphone and like talking to the kids. And she knew how to sort of get that attention and keep it going however she got it. She did it in different ways. And some of it was with the music. Some of it was with antics. There were some other unfortunate, kind of side effects and things. But she had never yelled at me. And that was always a big thing. And I was always grateful to her about how she kind of treated the whole thing. Yeah, it was kind of a circus, and yeah, it was strange and kind of weird, but at the same time, we were all kind of doing it together.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it. I look back on it as a real learning experience.
Yeah. Did you work with her when they did the Marilyn Manson tour, the kind of infamous Marilyn Manson tour? Were you around then?
No, that might have been...
It was 97, I believe, or 98.
Oh, 97? No, no, so I did her in like 94, 95.
Okay.
I believe it was. And then I was off doing other things after that. And then they had taken a break, and then she came back, and they had just gotten new people and stuff. But the tie-in to where I'm at now is that years later, Billy Bush, he ended up going to work for Garbage.
Okay.
And who I love just because, the music, but then I love the fact that they were mostly from my home state, apart from Shirley, of course. And so Billy Bush had gone to work for them, which led to my working for them later on in my career. The other tie-in is that Q Prime, who manages Metallica, had started managing Courtney's band, Courtney and Hole, when I was working for them. They had switched from Gold Mountain, which was like Beastie Boys and a bunch of other cool acts, to then went to Q Prime. Mm-hmm. So I had started my relationship with a bunch of the same people that are still there way back then, and which helped me, I think, for them to sort of feel comfortable with me when it was time for James to search out a new guitar tech. So I'd already come in kind of already being slightly vetted by management, at least.
Yeah, so that would be famous. It's Peter Mensch at Q Prime, isn't it? Is the kind of the big boy there who manages some enormous acts. Yeah,
and the other day-to-day people, that are organizing the tours and things like that, that you still kind of end up working with. Yeah.
So after Hole, obviously you've started that relationship. Are we getting a little bit closer to? I mean, at this point, are you thinking I mostly want to work with kind of bigger bands at bigger arenas, or you're doing smaller shows, or just mixing it up?
I had, the industry sort of went up and down a little bit. I'd end up working for a couple smaller bands here and there just to kind of stay on the road. They're more like van tour kind of things. And, obviously you want to be on a larger tour just because there's more money available to like having a bigger budget for getting things that you need as a backline tech, like extra guitars, extra equipment, real road cases, and all that kind of stuff. That's what I wanted to work with. Like I've been on plenty of tours that were, suitcase tours, as I call them, where you open up the suitcase and there's a bunch of cables in there, and you get everything out and you tape it down on the floor and pack the suitcase up at the end of the night and get on your way. I still say you can't do a tour without a suitcase. That's kind of one of my stipulations. Got to have a suitcase there somewhere. But I wanted to do that, and I was actually getting to the point. I had gone on to work for Veruca Salt, who had opened up for Hole for a while. So I got to know them. They were also a Q Prime act. I ended up doing a record project with them and Bob Rock, which is another Metallica tie-in, of course, right? Mm-hmm. So in Hawaii, which was a horrible time. 3 months in Hawaii, just hanging out, surfing and everything. It was terrible. I don't recommend it.
Sounds rough, man. Sounds really rough.
But let's see, I had worked for by this time I had worked for Live, and that was kind of more like a little bit more corporate feel. And I had just kind of gotten to the point where I wasn't really feeling all that challenged by what I was doing. Like, take the strings off, put the strings back on, do it again tomorrow. And I was pretty close to getting out of the business when Justin Crew, who's Kirk Hammett's guitar tech, had been out on Metallica already for a few years. I met him because he came in to help on Garbage when somebody got sick. And that's when I first met Justin, and he and I got along like a house on fire. So as time passed, I think I was filling in for him on like a Tori Amos tour, just going, doing whatever interesting and fun, that he said, well, I think Tori Amos tour came through North Carolina where he lives, and he came down to the show to say hi to everybody. And he's like, well, James fired his guitar tech last night. And there have been a lot of changes at that point, of course, because, that was the start of, that was some kind of Monster era, which I wasn't part of, the filming and all that. And I started with Metallica in 2003. But yeah, so Justin said, hey, this is what's going on. We don't really know if we have jobs still, if the tour is still going to go, or what's happening. And that I just said, well, I'll put my name in the hat. And he did. And James was sort of taking a little more control over who was going to be working for him, rather than just take whoever the other backline techs suggested, like, oh, we got to get this guy, and then deal with it. He wanted to sit down with a few people and meet with them face to face and have a chat and find out who they were before he hired somebody. That's when you start shitting yourself, right? When you know you've got to go and meet James Hetfield for the first time. Yeah, interesting story. At that point, I hadn't been on any kind of a job interview since I worked at the Pizza Hut in high school. I just, because you didn't need to, you were vetted through your friends or management or whomever, and by your reputation. Yeah. And James wasn't having any of that. He didn't know me from Adam. So yeah, they flew me out to San Francisco, and somebody picked me up and took me to HQ. And I remember them saying, okay, hey, yeah, come sit in the jam room back here and hang out for a little while. James is still talking to another guitar tech up front, and it was a little secretive. And they were like, would bring somebody in the building, interview James, and then they would go out, and then somebody else would come in, and I was sitting there just kind of like developing a severe case of cottonmouth, and just wondering what was going to happen. And I hear a motorcycle just full on open exhaust, just blah, 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 pulling into the building in basically the next room over. And I'm like, okay, well, that's got to be James. And I hung out for a little while. And by the time James called me up, I was kind of like ready to just have a normal conversation, because I wasn't going to bullshit him. I knew I wasn't going to, somebody like that's been through the business and been through so many things in the business for so long, they can spot bullshit from a mile away. And to me, it's the people that make real mistakes. They don't think that people can see their BS. Yeah. And that's one thing I've never done with James, is I'm always like straight up, just honest. Here's what it is. I screwed up. I made a mistake. You know what I mean? Like, and he's great that way. We get over it and we move on. And I just tried to give him a sense of who I was. And I liked old cars. He likes old cars. So I was kind of showing him what I had and different stuff like that, and hung out. And then somebody took me back to the hotel, and I was due to fly home that same day. Yeah. And got a phone call. It was maybe half an hour later, 45 minutes later, something like that. So I thought, oh man, I'm going to go home and sit for like a week and just, tap my fingers on the table and not know what's going on. But just made a decision, and we were off and running. Wow. Presumably that's a life-changing thing to happen right there, right? Yeah. Well, what I was hoping was that, again, having a sort of feeling stuck in what I was doing before that, I knew that Metallica had always pushed the envelope in whatever they were doing, how they toured, how much they toured, where they toured. I knew that they were up to, kind of doing things first, or, trying to be pioneers or whatever. And I wanted to be part of that. I was ready for a challenge, and I knew it would be there with them, and it continues to be a challenge. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, well, yeah, we can talk about all the different challenging things they've done as we go through it, but I was kind of interested to ask you what your first day on the job was like, because even though you've mentioned Hole and Lollapalooza and Green and big bands, arena sized bands, Live were a huge band in the US.
Metallica are the biggest metal band ever. One of the biggest bands ever, full stop.
It was the show was in Japan. And so you're already sort of feeling a little strange and isolated, but I don't know, I guess I may still have PTSD from it, but it's a lot like setting your hair on fire and trying to put it out by running around. It was I was trying to I remember kind of trying to rely on all my experience at that point to keep me, involved, keep me focused and staying in the moment. At the time, we hadn't had, oh man, I don't even know if we even had rehearsals before that. We might have rehearsed for one day, if I remember right. Yeah.
Wow.
But this was my first position where I had to do all the switching for James. So I sat at home for a couple months before that, learning the parts and making my own cheat sheets and stuff to kind of follow along and making sure I was switching from the clean sound to the heavy sound and doing all that stuff at the right time. That was a whole nother layer of challenge that I had to get used to. And that was tough to do. That was definitely trial by fire.
Yeah. Wow.
But we made it. Yeah, it took a while to calm down and a good friend, on the tour said, I love your work. You just got to settle down a little bit. And that's really all I needed to do was just kind of, okay, I'm doing this.
Was there a point where when did you first enjoy the job? Do you know what I mean? Because I imagine, like, when you talk about PTSD and setting your hair on fire, it kind of sounds like,
the moment that my first show went really well and I was happy with it, that was when I started enjoying it.
Right.
And you try and hold on to that feeling. But yeah, when you feel like I've done a good job, I feel like I didn't screw up too bad, or I thought, there's always things to improve, and you're always trying to improve, whether it's being in the right place at the right time with the guitar, or with the switching, or with the sounds, or whatever it is. You always, it's kind of a daily struggle to make it the best. But once you have this sort of feeling of accomplishment, like, okay, I did this well. I'm able to do this. And you realize, okay, they are a band a lot in the same manner that a lot of other bands are out there doing it. Everything boils down to the music and the performance. There's nothing extraordinary insofar as, like, you can't do this job because you don't understand magic. Or like it's attainable, you know what I mean? Some things feel unattainable and like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this, so it's something you kind of have to prove to yourself, because in the back of your mind you're going, okay, this is one of the biggest free bands in the world, and I want to prove to myself that I can do this and that I can be good at it, and I want to be able to walk away from it saying, oh well, I did the best I could. And I want to be able to walk away from it and say, I'm really happy with how I did that.
Yeah.
So,
do you get a sense of, I know obviously you are, as you said, doing the pedals for the live show. Is there a little part of you that goes, when that riff in Battery kicks in and 100,000 people go, ah, and you've kind of had a part to play in that happening? That must be such an almighty rush of adrenaline.
Yeah, there's the larger crowds really do add to the level of excitement, the level of satisfaction.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you say Battery, because there's an intro that's played before the band goes up, and usually it's in a later part of the set, so everything's already been up and working. We've already kind of been doing the dance for a little while, so that's fine. But I always have this little kind of moment of doubt, or I don't know if it's doubt, but it's more like adrenaline, because as the intro tape comes up and stops, and then it's just James and the guitar.
Yeah.
Inside you're crossing all your fingers and toes going, the guitar better work. The guitar better work. So as soon as he starts going, as soon as he hits it, and it is what it's supposed to be, then you're kind of like, all right, a couple more songs, and it's been a good night. So there are moments like that. The thing for me, I think that having to do all the switches and be involved with the songs as they're playing them is it helps you stay focused. It helps you stay in the moment. I don't think I would do very well if I had to work for a jam band where you just sat at the side of the stage for 3 hours not doing anything, you know, like I don't want to do that, you know. So being involved with, you know, helping the songs move forward and doing the right thing at the right time and being part of this sort of orchestrated thing really helps you to feel involved in, you know, the greater picture of the whole event, and not just like, okay, I can sit down and relax now. There kind of isn't a part of the day until all my stuff's put in a truck. That's the only time I can really kind of sit down and sort of be glad that it was a good day. And that's what I was talking about before with that sort of the challenge and the boredom setting in with just hanging out and, you know, tuning guitars. There's just a lot more going on with Metallica. There's always other challenges happening, like, okay, tonight, you know, we don't have a typical after show thing. We've got to put the stuff in containers and fly it all overnight. We got to get on a charter and get back to the United States from Europe to do Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something, you know. It's like there's always something lurking, you know, that's like, oh, okay, we could relax, but we have to get ready for this other thing coming up. And you really have to stay on your toes with this band, and you have to be involved. And I feel grateful that James gives me, you know, leeway with, you know, the actual sounds. Like I have to look after his sound, and it's something that, you know, I take seriously, and I'm glad that he lets me do that. But I'm grateful that he trusts me to do that.
Well, it's such an integral part of that guitar tone. It's maybe the most famous guitar tone on planet Earth, and it needs to sound like Metallica. Yeah. So I imagine that is, you know, even when even after years of doing it, I'm sure you still, that little thing in the back of your head that Metallica needs really, really, more than anyone, need to sound like Metallica, don't they? Yeah, and
I have to sort of learn to trust my instincts that if something isn't right, that I should just, you know, instead of just hanging back and see if it flies, to actually look for what's wrong and fix it. You know, we've had a lot of challenges with switching over from analog gear, the old amps and speakers and thing, to the digital gear and the Axe Effects equipment, and that was there was a learning curve there, and it was a real challenge to get all that going and to keep it up, because that's constantly evolving. So there's a lot going on with that stuff, but again, there's another level of interest and like, okay, now great, I get to use my computer and help the band, you know, which is, I don't know, to me is interesting. I want to talk to you about a few various shows and events that you would have been around for during the band's kind of career. The first one I was going to talk to you about is Download 2004, where Lars didn't play, and there was that set where Dave Lombardo and Joey Jordison, amongst others, stepped in. I've always wondered how that decision came about and what the feeling amongst the people who were involved that night actually was. Do you recall anything about that night? I recall a few things, yeah. I recall the first thing when I think about that show is it's a great, I had this great image of this sort of cabin where the band has, this is a tuning room, right? So the band has all their gear set up in there, and that's where they warm up for the show. Yeah. So we knew sort of early on that Lars wasn't going to make it. So I'm nowhere near any part of any decision making, whether they're going to play, not going to play, or whatever. I'm just kind of, you know, I'm there to help however I can help, right? You guys just let me know what we're doing, right? And there's this great image where you're kind of looking at the tuning room cabin, and then as you pan right in my mind's eye, there's this long line of drummers from
really
every band on the bill. Right?
Bet.
Every band there, probably some that weren't even playing there to play, and they're all standing there with their drumsticks in their hand, nervously like tapping or like warming up on their leg and kind of looking around and kind of nervously talking to each other like, I'm about to go in here and see and play with the band and see if they want to have me up on stage. So it was a pretty funny scene. Actually, but it was probably a great moment for a lot of drummers. And I don't know. I remember the feeling of like, okay, well, this is not a normal day. You know, even amongst abnormal days, this is not a normal day. So we're just going to do the best we can with it, right? So it almost took a little pressure off. It's going to be weird. We kind of know what we're doing. It's just going to kind of come together like it's going to come together. Like, you know, however it's going to happen is exactly how it's going to happen. And we're going to stand here and watch it. And I just thought it was kind of interesting and funny. And it was Justin Crew again. His joke after that whole leg was, you know, that he could tease Lars and tell him, hey, I've done more gigs on this tour than you have.
They sounded great that night. You know, they did actually sound great. It was they pulled it off.
I think if anything, you found for people that wondered what the band would sound like with a different drummer or a different person in the band, you got it. I mean, and it was not the same, you know, it wasn't the same. Like, you know, when Joey played, he had been in some sort of Metallica cover tribute band or something. So we knew all the songs in and out. Yeah. And he played very precisely, very even time, very precisely. And it was a whole different vibe. I mean, it was just different.
It certainly was. I was also going to ask you about the Orion Fest as well. Because that's something which I feel like it was a real shame that only lasted, what was it, 2 years or...
Yeah.
Even 2 years. I mean, the lineup, again, going back to kind of Lollapalooza that we were talking about before, such an eclectic lineup to put the Arctic Monkeys and Modest Mouse with Cavell Attack and a Dillinger Escape Plan. Like that sort of approach wasn't really happening around that time, and yet Metallica did it.
Yeah, it's the shameful part is that I don't even know that it was anybody's fault. It was just the touring industry, the music industry, the whole vibe at that time couldn't support a festival for some reason. I think even by then, Lollapalooza, I'm not sure if they had come back or if they had, it was only 2 different cities before, even now that's only in Chicago, I think. It was very strange, and it was pretty frustrating that, because I don't even think there was any sort of touring entity festival thing. Maybe the Vans Warped Tour. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Vans Warped Tour would be the only one.
It was just like this void in the climate of music and everything. I mean, now, if you did it now, or even next spring or something, when people are aching to get back at it, it may be a whole nother, a different outcome or something. I'm not really sure. It was just a strange time in the industry.
How did the band react to situations like that? Because, I mean, I always think any band at all should be applauded for pushing forward, for trying to do something new, for trying to do something unique. But I sort of wondered with a band the size of Metallica, how they react to stuff like that, or, you know, Through the Never, for example, the movie didn't seem to maybe do quite as much as they maybe initially thought it would. How do they react to those kind of setbacks?
Well, I think ultimately they have their own individual feelings about, you know, hoping things. They always want to hope that things are going to go the best that they can. Yeah. But, you know, they've been around for so long and done so many different things that they're very adept at just, okay, let's take a breath. It's behind us. We learned what we learned. On to the next idea. You know, what are they going to do? Sit around and mope about it? You don't really see those guys doing that. You know, it's because they don't. They might be, you know, disappointed in whatever, in the whole situation if things don't turn out the way they see it in their mind. But some things are unforeseeable, and they realize that. Working for this band, they usually do have a very clear vision of what they want to see and how they want things to go.
Yeah.
And so the challenge as a production manager or anybody else that's in the organization, a manager, anybody, is to help them get to that point to where they are happy with it, because they have high standards, and they should. Because I mean, people ask me, it's like, oh, what's it like to work for James? Is it super stressful? And I always say, on one hand, James is very appreciative. He's a gentleman. He loves to have fun. I enjoy just working for him. I enjoy talking to him, all these things. But he has a high standard for when he walks out on the stage. He just wants his stuff to be right, and I understand that, and that's what I want to do for him. So it's a good relationship. But having high standards and wanting to be a perfectionist, can lead to, I don't know if you want to call it regrets or whatever, but sometimes you wish you'd done things differently. But I mean, we all do that. It's like nobody can map out a perfect career. I mean, I often think about, well, I don't say often, but when I think about like the Lulu stuff, very different. Like Lou Reed, what?
Yeah.
And if you go back and just listen to how heavy some of those guitar parts are, and really just sort of take that part of it on its own, and if you can't enjoy any of these sort of experimental or different parts of it, and just listen to purely how heavy that stuff was, and it's still really amazing stuff. It's not what their fans are used to, and it was a different kind of tour, and it was a whole different vibe, but it was it was still kind of fun.
Yeah. I mean, you've kind of preempted what my next question was going to be, which is, I was going to say, I wrote a feature for Metal Hammer defending Lulu and saying, you've got Battery, you've got Master of Puppets, you've got Ride the Lightning. Like, why do you need them to do that again? These people who were sort of saying that stuff about Lulu. I personally, do I think Lulu's a perfect record? Not really, no. But is it a good record? Is it an interesting record? It's a really interesting record. And unless you know what the subject matter and the subject material, I mean, essentially this is a score for a play that no one's ever seen. So when they're just plucking the odd lyric out of context from nowhere, I think that's not fair for people to do that. I will defend Lulu for what it is. I think it's an incredibly brave and interesting thing, and I would have loved to have seen the shows personally.
Yeah, it's you're not taking it into an arena by any stretch, but I like the fact that the band can just go on this tangent, experience this thing, do it, make it happen, support it for a little while, and then go do something else. Like, why do they have to do the same thing over and over again? Like, what you just can't write Kill 'Em All over and over and over again.
Exactly.
And some people are going to like stuff and some people are not going to like stuff. And the band at this point, it's like they have done enough good things where they can afford to step back a little bit, take a little bit different look at things, try something different. And if it works, great. If not, that was yesterday.
They're not the biggest metal band of all time because they made Kill 'Em All 15 times. Do you know what I mean? There are some other bands who have done that, and they're not as big as Metallica, and that's why Metallica are bigger than those bands. It's because when they get it right, they're better than everyone else. I mean, we'll talk about S&M 2 in a little bit, which is, for me, a clear and obvious, like, slam dunk for them. But the one other gig before we do talk about that I want to ask you about is Glastonbury 2014. I've heard rumours, and I'm not going to say where from, but I've heard rumours that the band were very, very nervous about Glastonbury 2014 just before they went on stage. How was the vibe before that show?
There had been so much stuff written and talked about, and you're now in the, you know, pretty well in the age of people tweeting stuff, and everyone's got a blog and a music thing, and everybody's opinions are out there, right? And there was a lot of talk about, well, this festival isn't about this kind of music, and traditionally, you know, we like it this way and not that way. It had been talked about and debated in public and argued about, and people tried to put it down before it ever happened. The band knew that it was an important show. The band knows and knew that Glastonbury is a very important festival to a lot of people. To people in the area, the country, the region. It is kind of a, you know, sanctimonious thing, and the band knew that. And the last thing they wanted to do was to go in there and be disruptive to that. You know, Metallica is going to play Metallica's music no matter who you put them in front of, you know. So they didn't want to change anything. They weren't going to say, oh, well, okay, we're going to tailor our set so that people will find this more friendly or something like that. You know, the band really had to decide that we're just going to go in there and play and do our thing. And like I said, it had been talked about so much up to that point that by the time we actually got to the show, you almost like burned out at, like, can we just play the show already? Like, there's nothing left to talk about. There's nothing left to debate or argue or, you know, tell me how you feel. I don't care. Let's just play the show. And it turned out to be an amazing show. In my mind, it was people loved it. It was great. Nobody was disrespectful, you know. The organization was awesome to us. But, you know, there's the video, the pre-video thing, because there was this, I don't know, you probably remember more about it than me, but some people were upset because, you know, James is a hunter or something, right? So the piss take on the video was that England has this long tradition of hunting, fox hunting and whatever else. Yeah. So, you know, to maybe kind of expose or poke a little. It's almost the English way, right? Is to kind of like sort of trade piss takes. Yeah. Right? So you're going to give it out, you got to be able to take it. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what they did, and they had fun with it. And I don't feel like it was disrespectful at all. It was just more like, hey, look, you're who you are, we are who we are, you know. And there was like some fake picture of like James sitting behind a bear or something. It wasn't even James, you know. It's like, what are we talking about here? It's just, I love animals. Don't get me wrong. I used to hunt, you know, but this is not like a platform for PETA. This is just a music concert, you know.
I've actually got quite a funny story from around that time, because I was doing a breakfast radio show on a radio station at the time, and I was absolutely delighted that Metallica were playing Glastonbury. I was really, really excited. And, you know, anyone who thought they were going to tone their set down, if I remember rightly, they opened with Creeping Death. So, you know, that ain't happening. I actually got hold of the person who started on Facebook. I managed to find the guy who started this petition launch to get Metallica thrown off. I found the guy and I said, come on my radio show and debate it, and we'll debate it. And he wouldn't do it. And I think it's because I said to him, I was like, I presumably, you know, I know PJ Harvey is playing that weekend. She Wears Fur. Cypress Hill were playing that weekend. They've got a song called How I Can Just Kill a Man. I mean, you know, if you're looking for reasons to block a band off because of their lyrical content or because of what they wear or because of their political, but, you know, you can find them for pretty much anyone. And I just thought it was the absolute height of snobbery against metal that this guy, and he was like, no, it's nothing to do with the music. And I was like, well, then go for PJ Harvey, go for Cypress Hill, go for everybody who isn't, you know, morally sound, because I'm sorry, but just narrating over the top of a documentary is not as bad as actually wearing fur, as PJ Harvey has lots and lots of, you know, previews of.
Yeah. And it's, you know, everyone can have their personal convictions and everything, but, none of that comes out in the music. There's no like,
not at all.
It's not like anybody's acting like Ted Nugent or something, Yeah. But the real lesson is if some of these people could be backstage and be at that festival with the band and all of the other bands, and really see the camaraderie between all of the bands. Everybody's going around at the different stages, and so-and-so is playing on the B stage or this stage or that stage, and they're going around and they're standing on the side of the stage and watching other people play because they like music. And musicians like to see other bands, and Metallica likes all these different bands, and all those different bands really like Metallica. So there was none of that between any of the bands, so why should anyone else have a problem with it?
Very, very unusual behaviour. But anyway, I thought they did. I thought they smashed it. It was great set as ever.
It was fun, and it was fun when it was over, and it was great to see positive reviews that came out.
Yeah, for sure. I did mention S&M too. I was thinking about nearly financially crippling myself to get out to San Francisco and see some of those shows when they happened it was the middle of last year, the sort of start of 2019, wasn't it? I didn't manage to go in the end, but I did get to see the movie when it came through. The original S&M I thought was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. Ditto for number 2. How was it working on that show, and how different was it, and how high, like in terms of great Metallica shows, whereabouts do you think that one sits?
I wasn't part of the first S&M thing. That was before me, of course. So I didn't have anything to compare it to. So a lot of the other people, in the organization, some of the other people in the organization had already had experience kind of doing this, and it was a bit nerve-wracking because it wasn't like something we could just go in and knock out, like it's not like, hey, we got to play 2 songs live in front of the whole world. There's a different energy there that's like, okay, we're not nervous, but tense. This thing it was similar in that you're relying on a lot of different people to get to the end of the song. It's not just, hey, the 4 of us, if something happens, we mess up in the middle of the song, we can get it back together and make it to the end of the song. It's a lot different when there's an entire orchestra up there and everyone's trying to stay in the same moment to get to the end of the song. Those kinds of things they don't allow you to sort of relax and sort of let it flow. You know what I mean? So to me, the first show felt a little stifled because just from where I was sitting, because we hadn't done it yet. We just hadn't done it yet. So by the time we did the second show, when everybody was like, had a breath, had a day off to think about it, and go play the second show, to me was far more loose and like it flowed better. And we all kind of knew, now the stage is turning, and there's cameras in the way, there's musicians in the way. It's like, here comes the boom camera from above, or there's like, I don't know. It's just a lot of stuff going on. So from the production standpoint, it's very busy and hard to like just stand there and enjoy it. I was very glad when both shows were over, but I felt like the second show was just a little bit more, just a little smoother.
Is that sort of thing where you kind of have to maybe watch it back and go, oh yeah, that's a really good show? Because I don't know, from where I was sitting, I was like, oh, look at this. But I can imagine it is, like you say, quite busy and a very stressful environment to work in.
There's so many things that are going on that I'm not a part of, like the lighting and all of that stuff. And I can't even focus on that stuff when I'm just doing my hardest, trying my hardest and doing my best to keep together with James and, kind of watching him and making sure he's comfortable and, going from one change to the next, or, he has to come off the stage and then go back on the stage and come up at the right spot and do these different things. And there's no way I can come close to taking all of that in all at the same time from where I'm standing. So yeah, I would definitely have to go back and watch it. And even so, I don't think I would be able to pick out which song or which part was from which night. So
yeah, the movie's exceptional. I saw it in the cinema, and it's the closest thing to seeing it on a big screen with the with the sound system. It was pretty amazing. I mean, nothing quite beats being at the show, but that is, I was going to say close. It's probably still not quite close, but it was great. It was great all the same. Kind of bringing it up to date with where we are now. Obviously, I think everybody in metal and everybody in music was quite shocked when James went back into rehab. We don't have to talk about that, anything too personal at all, but we're just, hopefully he's on the mend, and hopefully, everybody obviously wishes James a full recovery and supports him with his kind of ongoing battles. So yeah, I mean, that's not really a question, more of a kind of just a statement, really.
Yeah, well, it's everyone, I don't know, like, I just have to assume that people make out their idols to be certain things, and they want that to be infallible. It's just speculation on my part, but you have to be able to step back from the music and this, like, this is entertainment, you know what I mean? We are not doing open heart surgery here. We're entertaining people, and the people that do that are human beings, and they have problems. I mean, there's unfortunately, mental illness runs in every social circle. We've lost a lot of artists over the last few years due to mental illness, and it's a serious thing. And there are organizations that James and the band have supported over the years, like Music Cares. I've been through rehab, and I've been sober for 10 years now, and it's not always an easy thing to do. It's not always an easy walk, and sometimes you have to stop, take a breath, and get grounded and figure out, okay, what really is my direction here? In somebody's case where they are on stage and they write music that people relate to and feel an emotional connection to, it's hard to separate yourself from that, and I understand that, but I think that it's just not automatic. People have their own problems in life, and you can't just you can't ignore it, because that's how we lose people.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to be a little bit understanding, especially in this day and age. You have to, like, whether it's somebody down the street or the rock star that you really like or something, you really have to understand that they're people and they have struggles and they need to be healthy too.
And presumably after all these years of working together, I mean, most people will see James Hetfield and go, it's James Hetfield from Metallica, but you see a man and a colleague and a friend and a father and all these other things that people probably don't initially consider when they go, it's the dude who wrote Seek and Destroy, that's it.
Yeah, well, the misconception is that you're rich beyond anybody's wildest dreams and you have no problems and everything is perfect, and what could possibly be wrong in your life is everybody loves you. It's just not reality. There's a couple hours on stage where most of these musicians are at their happiest, and that's where they're doing what they love to do. And then there's the other 22 hours of the day where you have to deal with sick family and all kinds of other things, and critics and people saying your last record is shit and all these other things. And you have to have the mental capacity to be able to process that information and let it go. Because as soon as you start believing all this stuff, because it's if you're on stage and you spend your whole day going around and people are telling you you're the greatest, you're the greatest, you're the greatest, it might not be so hard to believe it.
Yeah.
It's really a curious thing. It's because I've seen so many different kinds of egos in the business, all the different people I've worked for, and some people really just live by it and they need it and it's who they are. It's like if James Hetfield wasn't the lead singer and guitar player in Metallica, he would still be a solid dude, a good father, somebody that genuinely is concerned about other people and all the other good aspects of being a good person.
Yeah.
And he's not immune to things going wrong or addiction that he's talked openly about, and I just happen to understand it because I have some of the same problems myself. So it's something I could talk about for a long time, but and I can't speak for James, but it will be nice for him and the band and everyone to sort of collectively heal after all of this stuff, because that ran into coronavirus and now that's running into, all the other stuff that's happening here and elsewhere where people are kind of rising up, and it's a really interesting time for all of that. So I think more than ever, we need to get together as a group of people and be able to enjoy some music together and walk away from it and go, okay, I feel better now. How do we deal with this week and what can we do? It's going to be sorely needed. And I think when it finally does happen, I think it's probably going to be some of the best shows these bands will ever see. I mean, I have to laugh because, some of the people in the music industry are saying, oh, let's follow the professional sports models. We'll see what they do first, right? Well, they're talking about playing baseball in front of no one.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been to a sound check and the song ends and it's dead quiet,
it's weird, isn't it?
It's like this is not fun. It's not fun for the band. You know what I mean? Like we could just stay at home and do this and just play. The song ends and you go get in your car and you go home. Without the audience and the crowd there's no payoff. There's no reward, and people aren't going to do it. A half-filled arena or everybody standing 6 feet apart, it's just not going to do it.
You want to do it properly or not at all, really, don't you? That's the way it's got to be, unfortunately. Yeah. It's a unique set of circumstances that bring live music to what it is, that turn live music what it is.
Yeah, everyone's going to have to be ready for it. The bands, the crowds, the people, the security, everyone's going to have to be like in it together and say, okay, we are ready to do this.
Well, I mean, I echo, and I couldn't have put it any better myself regarding, we want Metallica back together. We want them playing. We want people having a good time. We want some sort of peaceful resolution. We want a healthy society. And I mean, I'm sure we've all got our fingers crossed for all of those things. So, Chad, before you go, we always end the podcast by asking a question about your very, very best and very, very worst day on the job ever. So if you've got one of each of those, I would be fascinated to hear what they are.
Oh, I don't know. Best days. It's really hard. I guess from a working standpoint, some of the best days are just are days where everything just kind of falls into place, and the weather is amazing, and the band goes on stage just as the sun is setting and the moon comes out, or I don't know. Sometimes there's just like this magical element that happens, and it's not something you can plan for or design. It just turns out to be, the band plays well, everything, the crowd was great, and you just walk away thinking that was good and that was fun and nobody got hurt, and I'd like to do that again.
Yeah,
that's just a good day. I've had some bad days where I'm in Europe and I find out my grandfather's passed away, and I can't get home.
Yeah.
To be there, there's things like that are really difficult to sort of reconcile. I think about some days are like, the weather to me is like the worst.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm somehow connected to the sun. I need it. But we did, I think we did we were starting up were we in Norway or something? We were starting a leg there, and it was cold and it was rainy, and we were like kind of next to the water, and it just rained, and it rained, and it rained. And then it got colder and colder, and the band had just come in from the US, and they wanted to rehearse, and we were there all night long. And that was one of the more miserable days. Just as miserable long day.
Sounds like Norway to me.
Yeah.
For sure.
I love it. Love the people.
Yeah.
And they
great,
have lovely weather when they have it, but that day in particular was not so great. There's the not so great days where, when we had to cancel in India, and they were trying to shore up the barricade with twine and sticks and spears and things. It was like that was going to be a complete nightmare. And we had to get shuttled out of there in a van back to the hotel, and then returned later to a bunch of broken gear. And you don't want to fear for your own safety.
No.
And that was definitely one of those days. But there's so many good days. I can't really pick one out. I don't know.
Do you still get a little, like, everybody listen to this, I guarantee it, when the Ecstasy of Gold comes on, you get a little shiver up your spine. Do you get that every time that comes on? When that intro tape, when that starts happening every time.
You know where I feel it the most, I think, is when it's time for me before the show to like, I've had some dinner or something, to walk back into the arena, and I go to my workstation by the stage, say we're in the round or something, and I start to do my pre-show stuff. It's that moment where you kind of go from backstage through the VOM, and you go through the black curtains, and you come into the arena where all the energy is focused, and maybe the opening act is on, and it's loud, and there's lights, and there's, smoke, and there's just people everywhere. There's this sort of, I hate to be cheesy and make it sound, like a gladiator when he walks in, but it's that entering the arena kind of like vibe that's, is a bit like church for me. And that's when I get really good feelings, and I feel like, this is going to be fun. That's right. Yeah. That's why we're doing this. Maybe I struggled today, but when you walk in there and it's time to put on the show, that's fun for me.
It's fun for all of us. As someone who's seen Metallica, I have no idea how many times I've seen Metallica off the top of my head. A lot. It's always a pleasure. So thank you for your service to metal, Chad.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, and thanks so much for talking to us. It's been lovely. Thank you, mate.
Pleasure.
All right, there you go. That was me talking to Chad. Really, really, really appreciate him coming on. He's, I'm sure, a very, very busy man. In fact, I know he's a very, very busy man, because not only does he work for Metallica, the biggest metal band in the history of metal bands, in his time off the road, Chad occupies his time with electronics and creating wireless stage solutions for musicians. So if that's of interest, please head over to light-time.com. That's light-time.com to find out more about that. That's his own little business that he's got going on alongside the behemoth that is Metallica. I want to say once more, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all of our guests throughout this season. Thank you so much to the guys over at Signature Brew, signaturebrew.co.uk. And I will be back to see more people from the music industry and more stories from some of your favourite artists at a later date. We will be coming back bigger than ever with season 3. Hopefully we won't have to ask everybody, what's it been like when you haven't been working and yada, yada, yada. Hopefully that is going to be a thing of the past. But for now, just want to say once again, thanks so much for listening. Follow us at Road Crew Pod on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook as well for everything that is going on within the podcast. And, as soon as we're coming back, you will be the first to know. But for now, we will see you another time. Thanks for listening.